two concepts of liberty remains one of the most influential works in political philosophy. In this lecture, delivered at the University of Oxford, Berlin delineates two fundamentally different ideas of liberty: negative liberty and positive liberty. His nuanced exploration of these concepts continues to shape discussions on freedom, authority, and individual rights in the modern world. Understanding these two types of liberty provides crucial insight into the ideological struggles that have defined much of modern political history. Negative liberty, freedom from interference. Negative liberty, in Berlin's framework, is defined as freedom from external constraints or interference. A person is free in this sense when they are not being obstructed by others in their choices. This concept centers around the question: what is the area within which the subject, a person or group of persons, is or should be left to do or be what he is able to do or be without interference by other persons? This idea of liberty emphasizes the absence of coercion. If an individual can act without being prevented by others, then that individual is considered free. Berlin argues that negative liberty is the kind typically upheld in liberal democracies, where the state's role is limited, and laws exist to protect individuals from arbitrary interference, particularly from the government itself. Aschentage, the role of the state in negative liberty. In systems that prioritize negative liberty, the role of the state is largely protective. It sets the boundaries within which individuals are free to act as they please, so long as their actions do not impinge upon the rights of others. The law ensures that others, whether individuals, groups, or even institutions, do not infringe upon one's sphere of personal autonomy. Berlin acknowledges that total absence of restraint is impossible, as any society must have some form of regulation to maintain order. However, he warns against allowing the state to define freedom too broadly, for this opens the door to creeping authoritarianism. Negative liberty, therefore, is not the same as anarchic freedom, but rather a carefully safeguarded zone of non-interference. Positive liberty, freedom to control one's life. In contrast, positive liberty concerns itself with the presence of control or self-mastery. Self-mastery. It answers the question: what or who is the source of control or interference that can determine someone to do or be this rather than that? In other words, positive liberty is the idea that one is free only when one is in control of oneself, when one can act in accordance with one's rational will, rather than being enslaved by desires, external authority, or ignorance. This concept has roots in classical and rationalist traditions, including the philosophies of Plato, Rousseau, and Hegel. For example, Rousseau's famous idea that one can be forced to be free captures the essence of positive liberty: the belief that true freedom lies in obedience to a rational collective will, even if it goes against individual desires. The dangers of positive liberty. Berlin's most enduring contribution may be his critique of positive liberty's potential to justify authoritarianism. When freedom is defined as self-mastery, or as realizing one's true self, it becomes possible for authorities claiming superior knowledge of what the true self is to coerce individuals for their own good. In other words, positive liberty can be used to rationalize oppression by asserting that individuals are not truly free unless they conform to a certain ideal. Historical examples of this phenomenon include totalitarian regimes that claim to liberate people by enforcing a collective vision, such as communism in the Soviet Union or fascism in Nazi Germany. Berlin is particularly critical of ideologies that claim that individuals can only be free when they serve the state or fulfill a predetermined social role. In these systems, the state often speaks on behalf of the people's real interests and may suppress dissent under the guise of promoting true liberty. Value pluralism and liberty. Berlin's distinction between negative and positive liberty is not just an academic taxonomy. It reflects his broader philosophical commitment to value pluralism, the idea that there are many conflicting but equally valid values that humans may pursue. Liberty, for Berlin, is just one value among many, and it often comes into conflict with other values, such as equality, justice, or security. Because values are plural and sometimes incommensurable, Berlin believes that political life requires balance and trade-offs. For instance, too much emphasis on negative liberty might lead to neglect of social welfare, while overemphasizing positive liberty might justify oppressive social engineering. Thus, Berlin advocates for a liberal, moderate, and cautious approach to political authority, one that recognizes the dangers of imposing one ideal over all others. Liberty and coercion. A central theme in Berlin's lecture is the relationship between liberty and coercion. He defines coercion as the deliberate interference of other human beings within the area in which an individual could otherwise act. Importantly, he makes a distinction between coercion and inability. A person in poverty may be unable to act in certain ways, e.g., take a vacation, access education, but if no one actively prevents them, they are not necessarily unfree in the negative sense. However, critics of Berlin argue that ignoring structural inequalities, which can severely limit real choices, renders this conception of freedom insufficient. Modern relevance. The relevance of Lin's ideas persists in contemporary debates about freedom. For instance, when discussing freedom of speech, proponents of negative liberty argue that individuals must be protected from censorship. Meanwhile, those invoking positive liberty might argue that speech must be regulated to protect social harmony or prevent harm, claiming that such regulation enables individuals to live more autonomous, meaningful lives. Similarly, debates on welfare and economic policy often mirror Berlin's distinction. Libertarians favoring negative liberty argue against government intervention in markets and advocate for individual responsibility. Social democrats and progressives, leaning toward positive liberty, support state programs that aim to empower individuals through education, healthcare, and income redistribution so they can genuinely participate in society and exercise control over their lives. Berlin's conclusion. A cautious defense of liberty. Berlin ultimately leans toward negative liberty as the safer, more defensible concept. He does not deny that positive liberty can have valid expressions such as personal growth, autonomy, and self-realization, but he cautions that it is more easily perverted into a tool of tyranny. The danger arises when governments or movements claim a monopoly on defining individuals' true needs, using such claims to override individual rights. He writes, "It is better to err on the side of pessimism and caution than on that of utopian solutions." This reflects Berlin's skepticism of grand ideological projects that promise liberation but often deliver domination. For Berlin, liberal democracy, though imperfect, is the best framework for maintaining a pluralistic balance between competing human values. Conclusion. Isaiah Berlin's two concepts of liberty remains a foundational text for anyone seeking to understand the philosophical underpinnings of freedom and political authority. His clear distinction between negative and positive liberty provides a powerful framework for analyzing the tensions between individual rights and collective goals. While acknowledging the appeal of positive liberty as self-mastery and empowerment, Berlin warns of its potential to justify coercive control. By contrast, negative liberty, freedom from interference, provides a vital safeguard against authoritarianism.